Hello, I'm G. Geronimo, the environment editor of Rappler. With me is Gozum, and we've been remotely covering the 2022 United Nations Climate Conference, or COP27, since last week. So today is the last day of COP27, and that is happening at Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt. Here's a rundown of what's happened so far at COP27. So last week, nagsalita yung mga world leaders and United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres told countries at the start that they face a choice, either they cooperate or perish. Sabi niya sa kanyang quote, greenhouse gas emissions keep growing, global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. Aside from UN Chief Guterres, former US Vice President Al Gore also rebuked world leaders and said, I quote, we have a credibility problem, all of us. We're talking and we're starting to act, but we're not doing enough. But right after those speeches, United Arab Emirates President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, whose country will host next year's COP28, he said that they will continue to produce fossil fuels for as long as there is a need. There were common themes among the country's national statements. So the national statements happened 4 days in total. And during those national statements, developed countries talked about what they're doing to address climate change, while developing countries like the Philippines urged richer nations to honor their commitments in climate finance and to pay up for climate damage, which has been a theme, which has been a main agenda and a contentious issue in COP27, loss and damage. Some leaders, like French President Emmanuel Macron, condemned the Russia-Ukraine war and insisted the crisis must be all the more the reason to act faster on climate change. Meron ding mga bansa who called for Taiwan to be included in the annual climate talks process, but such calls were criticized by China as it urged the summit to stick to the One China principle. There were leaders who spoke outside of the national statements. There was US President Joe Biden and Brazil's President-elect Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. They each had their own stages at COP27. Biden talked about how his country, the world's second biggest greenhouse gas emitter, was doing its part to combat climate change. He also declared in his November 11th speech that the US will meet its emission targets by 2030. Lula, meanwhile, was greeted like a rock star at COP27. In his speech, he announced his plan for Brazil to host COP30 in 2025. So he offered to host COP30 happening in 2025, and he wanted the venue to be in the Amazon rainforest itself. He said in his speech there could be no climate security for the world without a protected Amazon. Yeah.
So aside from these pronouncements of world leaders, ano nga ba yung mga plans na na-unveil sa conference? So unang-una we have the 25 priority actions. So this plan has the United States, Germany, Japan, Canada representing more than half the global economy, collectively agreeing on a set of steps. So yung goal nila dito is to send a signal to investors and companies. This is considered as the largest collaborative effort with companies to drive down the cost of cutting emissions across big industries such as power, transport, steel, hydrogen, and agriculture. Aside from that, we have more than 150 countries signing a pact to reduce methane emissions. So they pledge to cut about 30% this decade. However, it's important to note that China and India, the top two methane emitters in the world, did not sign the pact. We also have the Global Shield. So this platform aims to provide insurance and protection funding for countries damaged by floods and typhoons. So this is currently backed by around 170 million euros from Germany and around 40 million euros from other donors. This seems like good news, but some countries and advocates are wary that the Global Shield will dilute the ongoing talks for a more substantive deal on loss and damage funding. So those were some of the main things unveiled in the conference. G?
Our coverage is also covering, or we're also following the Philippine delegation na nandoon sa Egypt. And Rappler reported actually that into the second week, tsaka lang natin nalaman yung full composition or at least the provisional composition of the Philippine delegation. We also learned that officials leading the delegation, Environment Secretary Tony Yulo Loizaga, and Climate Change Commission Vice Chairperson and Executive Director Robert Borge, returned to the Philippines after the first week of talks rather, to answer questions from legislators about their agency's proposed 2023 budget. So in their place, ang pumalit ay si Philippine Ambassador to Egypt, Ezedin Tago. Actually, we saw him represent the Philippines in the national statements that happened in November 15. He took over as head of delegation, and then he represented the country during a high-level dialogue on climate finance, and again during the national statements nga, as I said. On November 16, that is 2 days ago, representatives of Philippine civil society and social movements issued a statement calling out the lack of a strong Philippine voice on the negotiating table, because of what's happened with the leadership of the Philippine delegation. They said that the lack of strong in-person leadership in Egypt at the very least makes the Philippine position look weak. The group said that they obtained a more detailed presentation of the Philippines' positions only halfway through the summit. Pero based on social media posts, it seems like they were finally able to engage with the Philippine delegation. They were able to meet at crunch time before the end of COP27. Yeah.
So actually, even for us covering COP, we were expecting to get the list of Filipino delegates coming to COP na mga before the actual event. Pero nalabas itong storya, nangyayari na yung COP. Pero aside from these things, no, ano nga ba yung positions, mga strategic positions and priorities ng Philippine delegation sa COP27? One of these is they pushed for expanding the definition of loss and damage to include extreme weather events and the impact of slow onset changes. So ano ba yung slow onset changes? Kasama dito yung rising sea levels, glacial retreat, yung pagkasira ng kagubatan at mga bundok. Ayan, gusto yan ipasok ng delegation sa definition ng loss and damage to expand the scope of this term. We're also demanding transparency from richer countries when it comes to climate finance, saan napupunta yung pera, magkano, etc. And there's also the call for rich countries to lessen their emissions and to abide by the safe carbon budget. Pagdating naman sa mga advocates ng mga Pilipino na nasa COP, anti-mining groups call the Philippine government to put a stop on deforestation and offshore mining. They say this exacerbates climate change. And a lot of advocates are also calling for renewable energy to phase out coal and fossil fuels in the Philippines as soon as possible. One of the movement leaders, Lily Nakpil, said climate finance should be provided as grants based on climate debt, not another opportunity for rich countries and corporations to profit from poor and vulnerable countries. So both the delegation and the Philippine advocates and activists, they sort of have the same line pagdating sa COP27, nandiyan yung loss and damage, yung pag-prioritize ng climate finance, yung tulong para sa mga vulnerable countries like the Philippines. So, itong mga nabanggit natin, these are actually the sticking points for this year's COP. These are the primary concerns and issues of developing parties and advocates that came from all over the world. Nandiyan na yung loss and damage, which some say na kung hindi raw naisama pa sa agenda ng COP na to ay failure na daw yung COP even before it started. We're also looking at new action steps to actualize fossil fuel phase out. Itong pag-phase out ng fossil fuel, hindi lang mga activists and advocates ang nagko-call for nito. Actually, the Philippine delegation was supportive of this call. And to replace it with renewable energy. And of course, there's much scrutiny over how each country is faring when it comes to their climate commitments. There's this process called the Mitigation Work Program, which entails regular check-in. Resulta to nung demands, no, year in, year out for more transparency and accountability, lalo na para sa mula sa mga mas mayayamang bansa na silang nag-e-emit ng mas maraming carbon emissions and nagko-cause ng climate change. G?
So now that we are down to the last hours of the talks, hopefully last hours lang, and it does not extend to days. We're down to the last few hours. UN Chief Guterres again urged countries to stand and deliver. Today, the UN Climate Agency published a draft negotiating text of the deal that delegates are hoping to agree on in the coming hours or days. Hopefully hours lang kasi last year what we saw was nag-extend din yung talks into the hours, and saka lang nagkaroon nung what we now call the Glasgow Climate Pact. So for this year, the target of yung text, yung draft deal, the target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is still in that text. Although, sabi ni ni US Climate Envoy John Kerry, there were countries who resisted this, yung 1.5. So imagine 1.5 still being resisted. There is still resistance until now with that target. The text, however, did not set out the proposed solution to the loss and damage financial arrangement. So yung minention ni Iya kanina, na one of the most contentious issues at COP27. So the document, meron lang siyang placeholder text on the issue, which means up until now, there are delegates, or the delegates were still seeking consensus on the matter. And in fact, EU, I think, they're proposing na magkaroon ng parang they want to break the impasse, pero the negotiations are still ongoing as of today, as we speak. So if you will remember, last year it was during the crunch time that India, China, and other countries successfully argued for watering down the language to say face down rather than face out. That is very important. And actually ito yung mga pinag-uusapan at dito nagkakaroon ng mga contentions yung mga countries in the language of the text, because that's important, the phase down versus the phase out of fossil fuels. So we will have to closely monitor developments like this as we monitor COP27's closing session today there in Egypt.
So marami pa tayong developments na aabangan tonight, naabot hanggang umaga siguro, we're expecting that. Most especially, beyond COP27, how parties will deliver on their promises. That said, today is the last day of COP27, so tune in on Raptors coverage. Follow G on Twitter at G Geronimo and me at Iya Gozum, and visit our live updates page at rplr.co/COP27. Thank you for watching. Good day.